Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Sophia. I'm Sophia Ufi Uko, founder of Violet Simon, a media platform that uses authentic storytelling to amplify the voices and experiences of diverse women in order to push representation and equality, inspire others, entertain, and generate calls to action on key women's issues in all categories of life. Conversations with Sophia is a talk show where we bring in guests to explore these themes. And today we have Katy Massey, a girls' rights activist and leadership consultant for various NGOs. Hi, Katy.
Hi, Sophia.
Lovely to meet you. So it was not lovely to meet you, actually. I know Katy.
Nice to see you though.
Nice to see you. Yeah. And it was just a very funny one, just getting this Zoom call. Just getting the Zoom call started. Very funny experience. But yeah, finally we're here and I'm glad that we're here chatting, even though I'm very envious of you because you're like miles away enjoying warm weather while we're battling
Yeah.
with we're battling with we're battling with the very, very confused weather here in London.
Yeah, I'm currently in Indonesia, so it's very, very warm, very dark because it's the evening now. So you can probably hear some geckos at some point.
Oh,
Yeah, there we go. That was one just there.
I love it. I love it so much. Yeah, so today we're talking again about girls' rights, activism, your journey towards it. You're very passionate about it, and gender equality. And so, we're gonna start off with your experience. What was your experience like? What led you to start, you know, children and girls' rights? What brought that passion up about?
So it's a really good question because I think it's come from lots of different places. I, as a child, always loved being around people. I always had an idea that I maybe wanted to be a teacher or to
Mm,
work with people or other children or to work in some kind of um, like caring way. I thought at some point about becoming a midwife. So I knew that that was always like somewhere going to be kind of along my path. But when I was really quite young, my grandparents lived in Malawi,
mhm,
and we were really fortunate to go out there when I was 6.
mhm,
And that trip was really quite profound in that I'd never like it kind of experienced my privilege up until that point. I lived in quite a middle class area, like predominantly white, and arrived in Malawi, and my grandparents were there, and it was importantly like a real culture shock. And my sister and I were playing with some girls that were there. We couldn't communicate because we couldn't speak Swahili, they couldn't speak English, but like as children do in their kind of like naive innocence, you
mhm,
mime and you dance and you play around. And I remember saying to my dad, like, why are these girls always here to like play with? Like, why are they not at school? And my dad said, oh, actually, like quite a lot of girls here don't get to go to school.
mhm,
And that was really the first time I ever realized that there was inequality, and that actually for me my life in the UK was really quite lovely and privileged, and that that wasn't the same experience for girls all over the world. And my grandparents lived there for about 6 or 7 years, and so I kind of heard a lot about it through them and their stories, and their experiences there. And so I know that that really was the beginning of something. I didn't know it at the time. I couldn't put those things into words. I didn't have the language about white privilege or white saviorism or like kind of racism or inequality. I didn't have those words, but something felt really wrong to me at that
mhm,
point, at that age. So I think that was probably the seed where it started.
mhm,
And then kind of along the way, when I was a teenager, I used to volunteer
mhm,
at kind of local primary schools and with children who were in the care system. And that really kind of got me really passionate about working with children who perhaps didn't have or don't have the same access
mhm.
to kind of support that I might have done.
Amazing. And um, yeah, I think we've covered it, but those experiences that you talked about, like in terms of how the things you did and what made you like decide you wanted to go into, girls' rights and children's rights. How did this experience, how did that affect you, or I would say personally, in terms of like the way you've I don't know, mentally, personally, and also like professionally?
So I had a pretty mixed childhood. Like at the beginning, it was really lovely, and had a really kind of supportive, beautiful nuclear family. And then around the age of 9 or 10, in my extended family, there were really significant challenges.
Mhm,
And kind of from that point on, childhood and growing up got quite difficult for me.
mhm,
And I really struggled. I felt really quite lonely. There was like significant kind of things going on in terms of suicide and
mhm,
financial issues in my wider family. And yeah, and at that point, I kind of thought I really wish I had someone to talk to. And so I know when I grew up and when I kind of went to university, a real driver for me was I wanted to be able to provide that for some children who were in a similar position, because all I really wanted and needed at that point was a listening ear, someone to hear how I was feeling, what was going on, and to kind of hold my hand through it. So I know that's really shaped my professional career. A lot of my work has been around working with children and adolescents going through trauma, some of which are things that I've experienced myself. And I think that's a real blessing at times, because I really understand. And I think sometimes as well, it can really hit home.
mm,
And I know there have been moments in my career where I have been doing work that has really been mirroring experiences I've had in my childhood. And I thought, you know what, actually this is quite challenging. And I think that's where having a really great support system,
mm.
having clinical supervision, all of those kinds of things are really helpful. And sometimes just taking a break as well, and just going, I'm in this career for the long haul. My career might be 40 or 50 years. I don't need to be doing it every single day of every single year. Like,
Mm.
we also need to, to rest and to, take a break.
Amazing. And that is something that I personally find hard to do. So it's so, and I think maybe most people, is it, will you say is this like idea of, we have to do it now, even though we know we want to do this for the long haul, is like, we have to do this now. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like, um, a way of like radical self-care to say this is what I'm doing and it's important that I take a break and I'm also able to be a better version of myself in order to help other people. And I was also actually going to ask you how you dealt with triggers, if any, in your everyday
Yeah,
life.
there were lots,
you
so
know
many.
and then
Yeah.
so you've kind of already answered it, but I don't know, now I'm asking specifically, like, because I'm sure
Yeah.
you would be seeing, like you said, mirroring experiences that it's like, oh my
Mhm.
God, is this me? you know,
Yeah, it's this thing. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and I've definitely worked with children before where I've then realized things about myself and my experiences because I'm seeing it through them and through their behavior. And I thought, oh wow, that that is something that I'd experienced or that was mirroring me too. So I think I definitely know in my 20s, so I'm 34 now. I definitely know that in my 20s, I was in full on rescuer mode. So if we think about the drama triangle, we've got persecutor, victim, and rescuer. I absolutely was the rescuer because I just didn't have the capacity to look at my own stuff or my own triggers. I wasn't in that space. And then at the age of kind of 21, 22, I started therapy, and I've been in and out of therapy for the last 12 or 13 years. And it's been the most incredible thing and the most challenging. But at that point, that early stage in my career, I just wanted to help everybody because that gave me a sense of validation. That gave me a sense of importance. I'm helpful. I'm good. I'm a good girl. I'm achieving something. I've got something to prove. It's part of my identity. And through therapy and growing up and also burning out as well, I kind of realized that A, that's not sustainable. B, that's not helpful for me or the other people that I'm trying to help because they don't need rescuing. And it's actually doing them a disservice to kind of show up in that way. So I think, yeah, it is radical self-care to take a break, and it can feel really selfish sometimes because these issues don't stop. So, you know, throughout my career, I've worked in teaching, youth justice, domestic violence, like these issues are like, they're everywhere. And so it can feel awful to put your out of office on and say, you know what, I'm going to go on a holiday, and whatever issues are going on over here are going to carry on, and someone else has to kind of try and support them. But without that, we just can't continue. And I've seen that. I've worked in the sector for 14 years now, and seen it firsthand. I've experienced it myself. It's part of the reason I'm here in Indonesia. I've taken a month off because I know it's so important to do that, to kind of take a break. COVID was so hard for everyone in so many different ways. And I think if you work in this sector, you know, we've seen in terms of girls' rights, the pandemic has set girls' rights back like even further. And that can feel so demoralizing because we're like, what? We've been doing all of this work. We've been fighting for so hard. And then something out of our control has now set all of this work back by all of these years. What's the point? You know, and there is a point, there definitely is, but the way I think to keep the passion alive and to keep yourself healthy is to take those regular breaks and prioritize. It's hard to do, but it's important.
Just interesting, you just actually just said something about the pandemic setting girls' rights back. So can you shed light on the how has the pandemic set girls' rights back, like farther than it's even very discouraging actually, isn't it? Like we're fighting so hard.
Yeah.
And it's something that it's so important. It's like that's something that I remember you said, which is, you know, often we talk about girls' rights, right? I know I'm digressing a little bit, but I'm just gonna like I feel like it's so important to add that, but it's about like how we as women and you know, and as people, basically, we grew up as adults, but whatever we started as kids, right? And some of all those experiences and that's why even with girls' rights and children, you know, and children's rights, it's so important that we nurture the children from that young age, because we grow up into adults and then we, you know, probably like I guess take whatever it is that we've learned and then all the baggage that comes with that as an adult. So so I think the question would be, first of all, how has the pandemic taken girls' rights backwards? What did the pandemic do?
In every possible way, which is not the answer anyone wants to hear. But so the current data says that it will take us between 132 to 135 years to achieve gender equality globally. No country in the world has achieved equality or is close. And the challenge with a humanitarian crisis is that girls are pretty much always the first kind of group, the first protected characteristic to suffer. And part of that can be cultural. So there are cultures and countries around the world that place the importance of boys' education above girls for various reasons. And so when there's limited opportunity, limited funding, limited capacity, or when some like family members need to stay back at home to raise other children or to earn money, quite often it is the girls that are kind of brought back. Things around kind of public health, sexual health, pregnancy, all of those challenges. When there's a humanitarian crisis, so like a pandemic, funding is then spread very, very thin. And so programs that normally would go to support, let's say, sexual health education, so to prevent girls from getting pregnant when they're younger so that they can go to school and they can learn and they can then go out and get a job or, you know, kind of make choices of their own, that funding gets diverted to this crisis. And so there's less, you know, for them. And it's girls that invariably are affected more because it's girls that get pregnant and then are the one that are responsible. So, I mean, every avenue that you go down, whether it's education, health, pregnancy, child marriage, any violence, any road you go down, you'll find that girls are impacted and affected. So we could be here for hours if you wanted to go down every one of those. But it's a real challenge.
Like, it's so important that we know these things, because a lot of people talk about these things, but we don't actually know the facts. We don't know the statistics, and it's so incredibly important that we do. And I think that brings me to the next question, which would be, my next question, which is actually why you think, why is it so important in the work that you do, from your experience, from your, whether it's personal experience and your experience, as an expert in this field as well. Why is girls' rights so important? And do you think that there is enough attention? Like, what can we do more in order to? So while we're talking about, oh, women empower, women's rights and gender equality, but I think in a lot of all the spaces, it's mostly focused on women, more women and less girls or less children. So tell us, like, why do you think it's so relevant? Why is it so important? And what can we do more in order to make things better for girls, in terms of equality and girls' rights and children's rights?
I think a really good place to start is understanding, what do we mean by girls' rights? What do we mean by children's rights? What do we mean by human rights? Because I think it can be really easy that we throw these phrases and these terms around, or we hear politicians talk about it, or we see a global conference on girls' rights and we think, okay, but surely everyone's rights are important. Like, why is there specifically something about girls? So I normally start there, which is we all have human rights and they are protected by law. Depending on which country we're in, they'll be different, but the UN has also got declarations on our human rights as well. And really they're like a grounding of a basic understanding of what we should be able to do and achieve, and how we should be protected to live our lives. And so all children should have the same rights, but because we know girls are predominantly impacted in a different way to boys, there are specific rights around girls' health, their access to education, that we know need a real focus, because they are, like I said previously, some of the first things that kind of go out the window when there's a crisis, a civil war, something significant going on in a country. And the challenge is that we can talk about it forever. If you stop anyone in the street and say, do you believe that girls deserve equal rights? Pretty much every person in the UK, for example, I imagine would say, yeah, that sounds like a good thing. That sounds like something we should all agree on. The challenge is getting us from a place of agreeing on that verbally and understanding what it actually means to put that into practice, and what is it that we need to ask of our politicians and our policymakers and the people in positions of powers. The issue isn't that simple. It's not a case of us just saying, yes, we agree that all girls deserve equal rights, and therefore we need to tell that to our MPs, and then they're just going to go off and make that happen. The challenges we face as girls, young women and women in the world are systemic. And so in the fabric of every society, there is inbuilt inequality, misogyny, and bias against girls and women. And so there's no one answer really in terms of like how we go about achieving gender equality, and every way that we can kind of work towards it. So whether that's someone like myself being really passionate about working with organizations that are working in girls' rights, or supporting like female CEOs who are doing incredible work in this space, or working, with marginalized groups. If someone's really passionate about climate change, that's equally as important, because climate change is a gendered issue as well, because climate change predominantly affects girls more than it does any other gender as well. So I know that's kind of like going slightly off the question really, but girls' rights is so important because it impacts everything that we do, and it's not enough for us to have a female in a position of power, because we need to look at where is that person come from. So if we think about UK politics, for example, we might think, oh, brilliant, like we've now got a female prime minister. That's wonderful, that's representation. But actually our political system is built on meritocracy. So it's built on the elite becoming more powerful.
Absolutely.
And so our prime minister is a figurehead of a system that is unequal and that perpetuates inequality, not just in a gendered way, but in a class, race, in every way possible. So it's not as easy as us saying, yeah, let's just get more women to the top. It's saying, what's the system underneath the people at the top, and is that encouraging and supporting more girls and young women to make their way all the way through and not just kind of be pushed to the top and seen as like a figurehead.
Amazing. That is so insightful, Katie. And you literally just took the words out of my mouth because it's just something I seen as well. They were saying the other day, because we talk about representation, but representation is it's all encompassing. It's not just about like being a woman. It's also about the other parts that, is about classism. It's about, even ability as well. All these issues is so important. It's not so, and I think it's so crucial, as I guess, even for, other, young girls as well. They want to see that there's, all these factors being put in place. Um And then in your experience, what has been like the most shocking thing you found out since working in children and girls' rights field?
How long have we got? There's
Please, just
oh, where do I start? I mean, I think when I'm really struggling,
Mhm.
the statistic around gender equality taking 135 years is really the thing that gets to me, because I think, well, that's obviously nowhere in my lifetime.
Mhm.
Um, so who knows, right? So I'm doing all this work, all the people around me are doing this work to really strive to make a difference for the lives of girls and women in any way that we can possibly, but we're not going to be alive to see like how does this play out, like what happens next.
Ah.
um and that sometimes I know when I know it's actually quite a good way for me to realize when I need to take a break, is
Mm.
when I really start to feel quite disheartened by it. So in a way it can be quite helpful. I think yeah, I mean, I've worked in this sector, like I said, for about 14 years, and
Mhm.
I really, really struggle with the challenges that the charity sector face
Mm.
in terms of funding.
Mm.
I just it baffles me beyond belief that we have so many incredible organizations doing really, really like grassroots, on the ground, incredibly tough work,
Mhm.
and they have to keep going in some way possible and keep reapplying for funding every year, but try and make their funding application sound more exciting to a funder, or to change the kind of way they're going to measure their impact. And it just isn't sustainable. And I find that quite shocking, really, because we know the issues that girls, if we think specifically about the UK, we know the issues that girls are facing in the UK.
Mhm.
And we really do know how to solve them. We've got so many incredible
Mhm.
organizations, academics, experts in this country. And so why aren't we doing it? And that sometimes I can find quite shocking, because it's not as simple to do it, but we have a huge amount of the answers. And the challenge then really is that the people in positions of power sometimes haven't got those things as their priority,
Mm.
as their number one priority, or perhaps it's not their level, their kind of area of expertise.
Mm.
We see quite often how quickly our cabinet gets reshuffled, which I imagine would be a bit of a challenge. Like, imagine if tomorrow someone came into you and said, right, you're now going to be in charge of transport. You're like, right, cool. Never thought about that in my life. And I understand that those cabinet ministers, those prime minister, those MPs
Mm.
are figurehead. They're not the experts. There's the policy writers and all of the all the
Mm.
people underneath in their team are the experts. But I just think our political system is an interesting one,
Mm.
in terms of how the impact that then has on this sector, and the way decisions are made and the way funding is rolled out, and how sustainable that is. So there's a long answer. It wasn't all of it. It wasn't all of it, but I think
Mm.
making funding sustainable, in every charity I've worked in the last decade and a half, that's really been a significant barrier to the work and challenge.
Mm. Amazing. And I just want to talk about, like, because I see that even with in terms of when we talk about girls' rights and children's rights and other aspects in terms of even I don't know if you're okay talking about it as well, because I saw it in a recent post about even the difficulties that children face, people who are trying to identify their sexuality as well, um, and how important that is, and how do you think that's kind of still tied to, children's rights and girls' rights?
As in kind of our LGBTQ rights kind
Yeah,
of link.
yeah. Do you think it's tied to children and girls' rights as well, especially because a lot of children experience this, go through these experiences from a young age as well.
Yeah, I mean, the right to choose how to express yourself and who to love and how to show up in the world is really relevant to children and to girls. There's a challenge in the sector
Mhm.
around the conversation around girls' rights and where the conversation around trans children and young people come into that.
Mm.
And if you've spent any time on Twitter, you will see the absolute chaos that ensues when conversations are tried to be had between the two kind of polarized sides of that conversation. There are some people who believe that there should be single sex, spaces, and that does not include trans children, young people. And then there are other people who disagree with that and say, no, we are inclusive and trans girls are girls. And so the yeah, it really is a human rights issue because it's protected in law. Trans rights are enshrined in the law of the UK. And so it really is a human rights issue and a children's rights issue when those things are being so freely um, and like openly debated, on a social media
Yeah,
platform
exactly.
when we've got a law that is really quite clear. And I think the other challenge as well, kind of going back to politics slightly, is that it's now become clickbait to have this conversation. And so when we were looking at the leadership race for our new prime minister, that
Mm,
was a really easy question for journalists to throw at potential candidates was, what is a woman? How would you define a woman?
mm,
And I really find that a challenge because that firstly is a conversation, is a question that they're trying to provoke,
mm,
a response. And they really want to polarize those two sides of
mm.
the conversation. And it's not helpful because we've got the answer. We know the answer. We know that trans girls are girls. That's what our law says. That's what, in this space, in the girl sector space, that's what we're seeing now in terms of girls organizations are inclusive. So look at any of the big organizations that work with girls and young women, and you'll see a kind of a statement that say, we're inclusive of those who identify as girls as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a really live conversation, and it's also one that people really quite often don't want to have because firstly, no one likes getting things wrong.
Mm,
So the majority of people are good people. So
yeah.
they don't want to say anything offensive. They don't want to say anything wrong. I think there's also a challenge that language changes very quickly. And I know I see it generally generationally. If I think about like my granddad's generation, would never have thought of what
Mm.
a pronoun meant in the
Yeah.
context that we now think of them. And so that's changed in the last kind of
Mm,
30, 40 years. So like it's all happened really quite quickly. And so I really empathize with people who show up to these conversations to say, I'm not quite sure of
mm,
what I'm meant to be doing or saying, but I'm listening and
mm.
I'm willing to learn. You know, those are my favorite kinds of conversations. We
Yeah.
don't all need to have all the answers.
Mhm,
I don't have all the answers.
mhm,
And I think it's good to be humble in that. But
mhm.
the challenge I find is when people really try and live in this black and white kind of
Mm,
um, area where some of this stuff is a bit of a grey zone. Like it's developing and we're learning as we go. But yeah, I really struggle with the the amount of hate that's flung around in this kind of conversation. And really, if we think about it, at the center of this conversation are children and young people, and and adults, really. But if you think about it in terms of my work, children and young people who are really questioning a hugely significant thing and need support, regardless of what the outcome is of their questioning. Like, they need someone to talk to, they need some support, they need to know that someone is alongside them saying, yeah, this probably feels really scary, and what you don't need is a whole barrage of people on social media that are sending you hate or turning up to pride marches or whatever and saying really hurtful things. Like, that's just so unnecessary for me, and in all of my work I try and come back to, like, at the heart of this are children and young people, and we're the adults, so we need to know what to do next. We need to support them. We need to hold their hand.
Thank you so much, Katy. That, like, I know we haven't got much left, but it was so illuminating. Talking with you. It's always a pleasure, and thank you for coming to Conversations with Sophia. We had Katy Massey today, and she shed a lot of light. And I hope that you've been able to take one or two things, from the conversation we've had today, and use that positive way, whether it's in your life or in the lives of other people that you can, as much as you can. So Conversations with Sophia is going to come back again. See you next time, but in the meantime, you should be able to get a copy of our magazine book Disruptors Series 1, which is available on our website at www.violettimon.co.uk. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Sophia Ufi Ukor. Take care and bye.